Hi, I'm Dr. Deb Scott, professor of trombone and bass trombone at Stephen F. Austin State University. That's in Nacogdoches, Texas, which is East Texas. I'm also a performing artist for Ralph Trombones and the director of the Composers Workshop for the International Trombone Festival. This year I selected the TMEA All-State Tenor Trombone Etudes, so I'm going to talk about those today and play them for you. My main goal in selecting these etudes was to make it playable for a variety of abilities. So an intermediate student could be successful on these etudes by playing slower tempos and maybe leaving out, some of the harder grace notes and things like that. And a more advanced student could show off a little bit more by performing at faster tempos, maybe playing some rubato, showing off the style and, of course, their advanced musical ability. So I hope you'll enjoy these etudes this year. The format of this video will be that I'll perform an etude and then I'll give a short teaching segment about it. Thanks for watching. So the first etude selected is by Voxman on page 21, Allegretto in A minor. This is a really fun etude. It can be played with a lot of rubato. However, everybody should start this etude with a metronome, making sure you know all the rhythms and all the notes before you even consider playing it with rubato. It's in the style of Arthur Pryor, who was a trombonist at the turn of the century, most famous for writing the trombone solo Bluebells of Scotland, but he also wrote a lot of other wonderful solos for trombone. So you should check those out and learn this style. That's one of the reasons I included it, because it's an important style for trombone. So he uses a very specific kind of rubato, but first of all, if you don't know what rubato means, it means pushing and pulling the tempo. In other words, speeding up and slowing down. But you don't get to just like pick a measure and say, I'm going to slow down this measure. You need to make it consistent within the subdivision, which means that if you're planning to speed up, in your mind, you need to be thinking one te, two te, one te, two te, one te, two te. Or if you're slowing down, you think one te, two te, one te, two te. And you always have that subdivision going, and that makes a successful rubato. The other thing that Arthur Pryor does a lot is he speeds up the tempo going through the phrase. So you can think of it like a car at the top of a hill who's lost its brakes, and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster and faster until it slows down at the bottom of the hill. I would encourage you to listen to some Arthur Pryor and learn this style. And if you're successful at learning all the other rhythms, you have to do that first. The other thing to think about is the range isn't too bad, but you open up with a high A, and I know some of you won't like that. And so you want to make sure that your air is ready to go, and that crescendo in the first measure is there to help you right away. So your air stream should stay fast to get up to the high note. You should support your sound, and you want to keep your corners firm and just go for the high note. And if you can't do it today, maybe you can do it tomorrow. You'll notice in measure 5, there are some staccato notes. You should kind of ignore those, but instead of playing something short, they don't really indicate a short note here in this situation. They're more of an accent. So I would just try to play those notes a little louder than normal. So if I were to keep the intro in time, it might sound like this. And then you go on. And notice how much softer it is in measure 9. You want to make sure that you have extreme dynamics there. I hope you can hear on the video how much difference that is. Notice that there are some accents, like in measure 9 and measure 11. So you want to make sure that you bring those out while you're playing softly. And you can just play those notes louder to bring them out. Something like that. The next thing is skip down to variation 1 in measure 24. This is going to be a fun variation for some of you. Some of you are going to want to take this variation and do exactly what we were talking about, speed up the phrases as you play it. And so you might even think about double tonguing it and using tucutu for your double tongue. But keep it light. It's piano, it's leggermente, which means light, and work on the accents. You want to make sure they're very clean. It's perfectly fine not to double tongue that. You can single tongue it and keep it at the same tempo, and that's fine for some of you. The forte in measure 32 and 33 gets a little tricky because of such a big leap there. It's almost 2 octaves. So a couple of suggestions I have to practice that are just to try it with a lip slur. Just practice that every day as a giant lip slur, and eventually you'll learn to get that flexibility between the high F and the low G so it'll speak. Another thing you need to think about is just dropping the jaw for the low G. Then we get to a new variation in measure 40, and this is where the triplets start. It's not appropriate to play this variation very fast. It just doesn't lend itself very well to that. And so just keep a triplet feel going, and I just use a single tongue, and it's also light, it's soft, but bring out the triplets. And so on, and then there's some more large leaps. When you get to measure 57, that's kind of like the opening again, but you can have more fun with it if you played around with it in the beginning. You can do it even more here because it's returning. And in measure 60, it has some dotted 8th, 16th notes that are pretty fun to bring out. So you can do the same thing with that section in 65 where it gets softer. Just have a little more fun with it. In measure 72, there's a lot of new material. I'll call this the Coda because it's not music that we've seen before. And it gets a little tricky in here, pretty technical. So you want to make sure you start slowly. You have all the accidentals figured out, all the sharps. Remember, if you have a G, raise it up one position and it becomes a G sharp. So figure out all those notes and then go through them slowly. Be careful on a couple of notes, like the F sharp should be a raised third position. Don't play high F sharp in normal third. It should come up about a half an inch to get it in tune. Same thing with G. Don't play it in second position. Bring it up about half an inch to play that one in tune. Be sure that you have an accidental in measure 78 that carries through. There's a G sharp, so don't miss that. But just start slowly and play the metronome game. Click it up one beat every day, and before you know it, you'll have it learned and you'll be playing the heck out of it. The second etude is G flat major Adagio cantabile on page 30. This etude is in the key of G flat, of course, and there are 6 flats. So be careful that you are learning to play the G flat major scale and that you are playing notes like C flat, which is the last flat, and C flat's the same thing as B natural. And you're also making sure you play G flat. For this particular etude, I would start learning it in the middle and learn this rhythm. This is what's going to really set people apart for this etude because it's difficult. So you need to practice the subdivision, and in measure 25, I would suggest that you break all the ties and you tongue all the subdivision. So because it goes back and forth between simple and compound time, in your mind, you need to be thinking 1 te, 2 la li, 3 te, 4 la li as your rhythm in several of these measures because you have tied notes and etc. I'll take the pickup to measure 25 and I'd play it like this. And then continue that idea. And I would play it like that for several weeks before you add the ties, because that's what needs to be in your mind as you play that to make the rhythm right. So then you have it all lined up and you're playing it right. And of course, the people who play rhythms right are going to be the ones that advance to region and state and things like that. Another place to subdivide is measure 3, and you have a 16th note triplet several times. And that should go on the and of the beat or the te of the beat. So you need to be thinking 1 te, 2 triplet, 3 te, 4 te in that measure. Or you could subdivide it. That's a really good technique to make sure that you're lining up your rhythms correctly. Another thing that's really important in this etude is the alternate positions. Since we're in the key of G flat major, that means we're going to be playing a lot of G flats, which are in 5th position, and a lot of D flats, which are also in 5th position. So the 2 alternates I want you to think about are F in 6th position, which is right next door to G flat. Instead of coming into 1st and 5th all the time, you've got 6th position F, and that's really handy to make it smoother. And the other one is B flat in 5th position, because you're going to have like a G flat major arpeggio, G flat, B flat, D flat, that can all be played in 5th. So B flat's in actually a little bit of a short 5th, and instead of coming into 1st, you can be successful that way. Continuing on in measure 27, I would play it like this. Right, so you have the alternates making it really smooth. If I didn't use alternates, it would sound like this. Right, and it's a lot choppier. So alternates are your friend, learn to use them. I think it's important to be aware of the articulations, like in measure 5. Some of that is not slurred, but instead it has a nice tongue. So be very particular about where you tongue. Like measure 5 would be to, do, to, do. And then finally, make sure that you learn vibrato correctly if you're going to use vibrato. Trombonists don't use a lot of vibrato, but sometimes when we have a long note, we like to make it a little bit pretty. What we don't want to do is change our air when we do that. So make sure that you're not like doing kind of a flute vibrato, which is a ha 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 ha, just doing something with your gut or your air to change the sound. But instead, you want to use your jaw. We call it jaw vibrato. And you want to move your jaw just like you're chewing gum. Yai, 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 yai. So a good place to show what you could do is measure 35 at the end. So just on the long G flats, I just put a little bit to make it, kind of pretty. So experiment with that if you haven't already. There are dynamic changes throughout this, so you want to be very careful because you have some places that are very loud, but you have a couple of places that are very soft. So in measure 17 and again in 25, it's pianissimo, so you need to learn to support your sound and get a really good airstream, but at the same time stay really relaxed and not use much pressure to play the pianissimo parts. So have fun with this and make sure you play musically and beautifully. The last etude is F Major Allegretto, and it's a pretty technical etude, especially in the middle with the grace notes. Of course, you can leave out the grace notes and play it a little bit slower, and it makes it a lot easier for the intermediate students or the younger students. So look at measure 32, and I'll play that part with no grace notes. And if you want to make it more difficult, you can speed up the tempo and add the grace notes by using a natural slur. A natural slur has a little pop to it that makes it a little bit interesting. It brings it out a little bit, and I think it's a really good place to use a natural slur right here. So that's going to be the line that sets the tempo for the rest of the piece. Depending on how fast you can play those grace notes, that's the tempo that you should play the rest of the piece. When you start the piece, you always want to think, how fast can I play those grace notes? Beep, ba, 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 dee, da, 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 dee. And that's how you get your tempo to begin the piece. There's some articulation marks I want to talk about because in measure 9 and 10, there's some staccato notes, and you don't want to play those too short. That would sound bad. And then continue the same style as you play softer. So you may have noticed there's some extreme dynamic changes there. And so those are fun because the first 3 lines has 6 different dynamic changes. So just have fun with that and bring that out and make it a surprise. I think playing musically is about making the audience feel like there's a surprise. So if you play loud and you've been playing soft, they're like, oh, that's loud. So that really is effective. Breathing throughout this etude is a little bit difficult. So there are some printed breath marks that I don't play at all because they just don't make any sense. So those are in measure 6, measure 20, and I also cut the one in measure 55. Those just don't make any sense. I do add a quick breath mark at the end of 36 going into the key change because you're going up to fortissimo, and that should be the loudest part of the piece, and you really need a good breath, and it makes musical sense to breathe right there. There's some more technical stuff at the end, especially in measure 54 through 57. There's some 4th position Ds that can really help that technique. Just practice those Ds. They're a little bit out on 4th position. So I recommend looking for alternates all the way through. Even when you're playing like a B flat major scale, you should always use that alternate D if it's between C and E flat. And anywhere where you see that in the piece, like measure 45 has a D that should be in 4th. Measure 41 has a D. So just look for those places and make sure you mark them and that you start practicing them early so they don't feel weird later. The more you practice alternates, the more comfortable they start feeling. So I would encourage you to do that. Finally, there's a couple of misprints in this one. In measure 28, there should be a D sharp on the 5th, 8th note there. And then in measure 70, make sure you've marked the downbeat as a B flat, resolving to an A on the 2nd beat. That's a misprint as well. So I hope I've given you some good tips for practicing these etudes. Thank you for watching my video. Good luck this year.